Brought to you by Williams. We make clean energy happen.
I'm Yasmin Gagne.
I'm Josh Christensen.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, me, gone on Instagram, it's a lot of really thin and hot women being like, I feel self-conscious about my thighs, but here I am in a bikini. Thank you so much. Recording Academy CEO Harvey Mason Jr.
Platforms that are exclusively featuring AI-generated music with very little or no human interaction or involvement. That's a little unnerving.
And as always, keeping tabs.
Raquel Chevermont, who's an art curator.
Her name sounds like a fancy cheese.
A soft, over-ripened cheese.
But first, here's the download. The news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
The dock workers' strike has come to a temporary end with a tentative wage agreement between the International Longshoremen's Association and the United States Maritime Alliance. The strike, which began last week, halted the import of goods like fruits and automobile parts. The new agreement includes a 61.5% wage increase over 6 years, but automation remains a key unresolved issue. Major ports began resuming operations on Friday, though supply chain recovery is expected to take several weeks. You're getting your Maltesers, Yaz.
Yeah, they may be melted, but I will get them. So, NVIDIA's market cap overtook Microsoft's on Monday, making it the second largest company in the world behind Apple. NVIDIA's shares rose over 2% on Monday, lifting the chipmaker's market cap to $3.13 trillion, ahead of Microsoft's $3.04 trillion.
It's really that extra $0.09 trillion that makes the difference between being financially well off and not for those company owners and shareholders.
Can you imagine even a 0.0 something of that? You'd be unbelievably wealthy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. NVIDIA's stock rose partly because its partner, fake-sounding company Supermicro Computer.
Supermicro Computer sounds like a company name you'd have in Grand Theft Auto.
It sounds like Prestige Worldwide, the company from Step Brothers. Well, Supermicro Computer is apparently real, and it reported shipping more than 100,000 GPUs for AI on Monday. NVIDIA's stock price has more than doubled in value since the start of the year as demand for its AI chips surged.
The Federal Trade Commission has the green light to pursue antitrust claims against Amazon. A federal judge unsealed a September 30th ruling that the FTC's lawsuit can proceed. However, some claims under state laws won't move forward. The trial is set for October 2026.
The September jobs report is out, and the U.S. saw their biggest gains in 6 months. 254,000 jobs were added, and unemployment dropped to 4.1%. Both numbers exceeded expectations. Despite the volatile nature of job numbers, Goldman Sachs believes labor market growth will remain strong. Financial markets now predict a higher chance of a quarter-point rate cut by the Fed in November.
What do you do for a rate cut day? Do you celebrate any sort of way? Do you get some takeout, wait for Jay Powell to...
I'm just excited to watch the kind of kabuki theater that is Jay Powell's sort of ambiguous pronouncements about future rate cuts.
I feel like he's just sitting there. It's
yeah.
Cut it a quarter point. Venture capitalist Ben Horowitz sent an email to Andreessen Horowitz employees saying that he and his wife plan to make a significant personal donation to Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. Plot twist, especially considering that the firm itself had backed Trump and made donations to him. Maybe that was mostly driven by Mark Andreessen, egg-shaped head man Mark Andreessen.
Well, Horowitz is personal friends with Kamala, so I think once she got in, he was like, oh, well, I got to do my friend a solid.
Yeah, this is great. Love the bet hedging that we have right now. Well, that's what Ben Horowitz is doing personally to support the re-election campaign of Kamala Harris. Welcome to the resistance, Ben Horowitz.
And finally, a little more election news.
What everyone needs right now.
Exactly.
Just a little bit more.
Both Kamala and Donald Trump have been ramping up their media presence ahead of the election. Elon Musk has made his first appearance at a Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, reinforcing his support for the former president by casting the election in dire terms.
Wow, what a uncharismatic speaker that man is.
I know, it's crazy.
It's insane.
Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris has been on a media blitz this week. Harris has appeared on Call Her Daddy, Alex Cooper's podcast. She's also appeared on 60 Minutes, The View, Howard Stern, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and a town hall with Univision this week.
She's really covering her basis with this. I think that hits most people in most places.
She's just missing the Most Innovative Companies podcast.
Yes, truly. Honestly, if we had more of an audience, we could get presidential candidates.
Well, yeah, of course. But all two of our fans are pretty engaged voters. And anyway.
We know what they're voting about.
And that's the news you need to know this week. So, Josh, have you ever done a fad diet?
I have not done a fad diet per se. I've mostly just done try not to eat as many carbs.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about it later in this segment. I'm sure it'll come up a little bit of what I've done. You know I'm on Wegovy. But I do want to talk about this one diet that my mom used to do when I was a kid. I don't remember all the details, but it was like a 3-day diet that was honestly the most insane thing that I've ever seen.
Oh, is it the maple syrup one?
No, it wasn't the maple syrup one, but it was something where you were supposed to lose 10 pounds in 3 days. One of the meals was just 2 hot dogs, no bun. was one of the meals in this diet.
So good.
It was a ridiculous diet. My mom did it several times, and she did lose weight, but it's just because you're eating
nothing,
600 calories each day. It's so dumb. How about you? Did you ever do a fad diet?
Oh, did I ever? Remember those Victoria's Secret Train Like an Angel videos from the aughts?
No, I do not remember this.
They'd be like, this is a day in my life as I prepare for the Victoria's Secret runway show. And they'd be like, I puree 3 zucchinis, I eat them, and then I do 3 consecutive workout classes and sit in a sauna. And I was like, great plan. Gonna do it. That's me.
God. This is all just, I mean, it's very serious that so much of diet culture was just develop an eating disorder.
Yeah.
So we're talking about fad diets because today we're talking about WeightWatchers, maybe the king of the fad diet overall. And we're turning the tables on Yaz because she wrote this feature, so I'm going to interview her. So 2 weeks ago, the WeightWatchers board ousted CEO Seema Sistani, who helmed the company for 2.5 years. During that time, the company has radically altered its business model to try to stay competitive in the Ozempic era. So Yaz, your feature is in the magazine, our current magazine, out on newsstands right now, so everyone should go and buy that. But you wrote about Sistani's turnaround efforts at the company and the tough position it's in at this moment. And conspicuously, it came out just before this firing. So, did you get her fired?
No, I didn't. And actually, I want to say, I've interviewed Seema. We met her at Camp FFF. I like her, both on a personal level and actually as a CEO. And I'll explain why in a bit. But
agreed.
When the announcement came out that her board was letting her go, because the board basically decided they didn't have confidence in her, I guess. They just didn't think she was the right CEO for the moment. The company's stock, WeightWatchers stock, only dropped about 3%, which kind of tells you that she wasn't the problem at the company. So Nike replaced its CEO, John Donahoe. We've written about this. When he was let go by the board, stock rallied 25%. So then it's you're the problem. In this case, Seema's not the problem. I think the bigger issues are just that there are some real headwinds, which we'll get into, that WeightWatchers is facing that make the business really tough right now.
What is the problem? What are these headwinds?
Ozempic.
Yeah.
Put simply, Ozempic. WeightWatchers obviously spent more than 60 years telling people they could basically diet their way into weight loss, and that if they were gaining weight, that was really their fault. And all of a sudden, they're telling people, we've talked about this on previous episodes, that dieting may not work for you, and you may actually need GLP-1s. And there's an argument to be made, and I totally get this, that the science has changed, right? We have new medication available. We have a new understanding of weight loss, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it does feel like probably to some customers, and definitely to some customers actually, kind of like a bait and switch.
Yeah. I mean, it changed everything in the weight loss culture.
Absolutely.
We talked about this last May, I want to say, when you wrote the story. You went to the Oprah event. Oprah did this event. It was her final Weight Watchers event. We talked about at the time that being like a shift for Weight Watchers, but to what? We didn't really have an answer then.
Totally. So in 2018, the company brought in $1.5 billion in revenue. That was kind of an all-time high for them. They were doing super well. At the time, I actually attended a Oprah arena tour stop for Weight Watchers, and it was packed.
That's kind of a wild thing. An arena tour for Weight Watchers with Oprah.
So weird. Michelle Obama spoke. Yeah, It was very strange. It ended 2023, so last year, with an annual revenue of $890 million. So that's down 50% from its 2018 peak in just 3 years.
I was going to say, that's less than 1.5
that
billion.
Is, significantly less. And that trend is not reversing. Like, on its most recent earnings call, Weight Watchers lowered its 2024 revenue outlook to $770 million. So that's, more than $100 million less than last year. It also said it could end the year with 3.1 million subscribers, which would be a drop of almost 20% from what it was in 2023. And you can see it, right? The company is trimming costs. They conducted these layoffs where they laid off 40% of employees at the sort of VP level or above, which is kind of crazy because it's also a sign of probably a pretty top-heavy organization, which I know we've seen in other places. Weight Watchers stock 6 years ago in 2018 was trading at $100 a share. Now it's trading for less than $1 a share, which is like delisting territory.
So you're saying buy the dip to the moon with Weight Watchers?
Yes, that's exactly.
Honestly, Weight Watchers seems like a prime roaring kitty candidate for the next meme stock.
Totally. Although I suppose with the meme stocks, it was like, well, I love going to GameStop. And I don't think anybody's like, you know what? I love.
That's true. Can we talk a little bit more about Seema Sistani? Because she was brought to the company in 2022, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
What was she brought there to do?
So to give you some background on Seema's personal relationship with Weight Watchers, she joined Weight Watchers as a member after the birth of her first child. She lost a lot of weight using the sort of traditional points-based program. I think she lost like 60 pounds or something. So she was already kind of a believer in the company or the system. Prior to becoming CEO of Weight Watchers, she'd worked at Tumblr, and then she co-founded House Party, which is a social media app that was acquired by Epic Games.
Did you play House Party during the pandemic? I feel like there was
one time. Yeah, it was a real pandemic thing. So her experience is actually like in creating and building digital communities. And when she joined Weight Watchers, the company was basically, at the time, trying to compete with digital upstarts like Noom. So they wanted to be able to take the sort of in-person member experience and really translate that online in an effective way. And this was, 2022, we were coming out of the pandemic. Their business needed to shift that way.
Yeah.
The problem is that the same month she was hired, the FDA declared that Wegovy was in shortage. So in some ways, like, she wasn't exactly set up to fail, but the timing was just super unfortunate.
Well, they didn't really bring her in to deal with like telemedicine.
Exactly.
It was
like
about digital
wheelhouse.
community.
Exactly.
Yeah. I actually did Noom.
Yeah.
I'm on Wegovy right now. Me and Elon Musk. The only two users of it. I've struggled with my weight for the past several years overall. I feel like I'm kind of like a prime candidate where it really just... for me, it kind of is just a self-control thing. Like, I'm one of those people that just, like, I overeat. I know that, but, like...
And also through my reporting, you realize, like, the sort of... It's so easy to say self-control, but, in talking to people who sort of need these medications, and I mean, even talking to you, it is so much harder than that, if that makes sense. Like,
oh yeah, I don't think it's like a moral failing. There's a lot of reasons. Like, I have it, like, we work pretty stressful jobs at times. Not that, I'm not a brain surgeon.
I'm a sugar addict, as we know.
Yeah, I'm a junk food addict. Like, I get stressed and I eat. That's a real thing, and that's not something where it's just like, oh, you're just kind of a fat loser, Josh. So stop doing that, virgin. Me, when I'm struggling with weight loss, is like Smeagol and Gollum. Are you gonna eat those Doritos? No. But I did Noom. I did Noom actually when I wanted to lose weight before I got married for my wedding. And it actually worked for me. I lost like 20 pounds on that, and I wasn't quite as heavy before.
So I wrote a piece about Noom a few years ago, and what inspired it is talking to so many friends. I mean, I'm talking to like 5 or 6 friends who were on Noom, and Noom would be like, "Oh, you want to lose 10 pounds in 6 weeks? Why don't you just eat 1,000 calories a day?" Like,
that was basically it. Noom was like, we use cognitive behavioral therapy, and there was like all of these like daily prompts that was just like, hey, if you just like stop being a fat loser. Not really. I do want to say I'm being a little insensitive. I'm saying this about myself. This is me projecting the apps. There was no moral failing to being overweight. But that's what these apps make you feel like. It's what I think a lot of people thought WeightWatchers made them feel like, or any of the other fad diet trends. But let's get back to GLP-1s. So I know WeightWatchers is now selling GLP-1s, which, I mean, who isn't at this point? Because we talked about that in our Oprah episode last year. So when did that start?
So they're kind of not exactly selling GLP-1s. I'll explain this in a second. And actually, Noom is also part of this, is doing the same thing. So we actually recorded this conversation last week, but on Tuesday, there was some big news about WeightWatchers, which makes this next segment a little bit outdated. On Tuesday, WeightWatchers stock jumped 25% after the company announced that it would begin providing compounded versions of GLP-1s to its members. Now that means basically they're providing generics because brand names are really expensive. Anyway, back to the conversation. Last year, WeightWatchers acquired a telemedicine company called Sequence for about $132 million. Sequence was then rebranded to something called WeightWatchers Clinic. And now in the sort of WeightWatchers app, or, you know, when you log on as a member, even to the traditional sort of points-based program, it's offered as sort of another path or another option you could take alongside the points-based method. So through Sequence, customers basically pay $99 a month to access a physician, so a doctor or a nurse who can prescribe things, who can then prescribe them GLP-1s. So the company is not a GLP-1 provider, it's more like a prescription provider, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, so $99 a month, that has nothing to do with the actual price of the medication, which we know is super expensive, right?
Yeah, so that is definitely true. And I do want to talk about that. One thing I will say is $99 a month, like, given that you can get GLP-1 prescriptions from like your PCP, who you don't pay $99 to, it's also like a weird value proposition in that sense. But I suppose it's the price of convenience. You know, if you're in the WeightWatchers system, it might kind of feel comforting or easier to integrate into your life that way. WeightWatchers Clinic does work with insurance, but even then, a lot of insurances don't cover the price of GLP-1s. I mean, I spoke to one woman, it's in the article, who was on GLP-1s for a couple of months through WeightWatchers Clinic, like loved it, said, you know, for once, like the sort of constant chatter or noise in my brain was just gone.
Yeah.
But she couldn't afford it. And through WeightWatchers Clinic, she ended up going on Contrave, which is another weight loss drug that is, you know, basically less effective.
Yeah.
And that was covered by her insurance. So there are some alternatives, but, you know, you might subscribe to WeightWatchers Clinic, get a prescription, not be able to afford the medication, go back to your sort of WeightWatchers Clinic doctor and say, well, what am I supposed to do now? And they may be like, you know, you could try the points-based method we've been doing for a while. Seems like a pretty frustrating experience.
Yeah, which I think is the same problems that all of these other like non-Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly providers are having with people, is like access, cost, all of these things. Speaking of some of these other companies, so I happen to get ads for Hims all the time, mostly for hair loss, and they tout lower cost GLP-1s. It's usually, I've seen like, you can get it for $199 a month or something in that range, or as low as, which is always, you know,
yeah, that's like for the lowest dose. And then, yeah,
then it goes up. So what's going on there? And could WeightWatchers offer something like that?
So it's a little complicated, but in short, the answer is yes. So we actually recorded this conversation last week, but on Tuesday, there was some big news about WeightWatchers, which makes this next segment a little bit outdated. On Tuesday, WeightWatchers stock jumped 25% after the company announced that it would begin providing compounded versions of GLP-1s to its members. Now that means basically they're providing generics because brand names are really expensive. Anyway, back to the conversation. Hims and Hers are selling GLP-1 medication that's made in something called a compounding pharmacy. Stay with me here. It's a little jargony, but I think it's worth knowing. Compounding facilities are these sort of like manufacturing bases that are allowed to manufacture their own version of brand name drugs, so they could make their own Ozempic when the FDA declares a shortage, or if like people require like a weird dose of something that's not offered in the sort of standard dosing. Now, there are some FDA-approved compounding facilities, and I think Hims is actually sort of working or has contracted with one. But it's also kind of an unregulated area. So, you know, if you walk around Manhattan now, you'll see Ozempic advertised in tons of like med spas. It'll be like, do you want microneedling and also Ozempic? A lot of that medication is sort of manufactured in an unregulated compounding facility. There's a lot of health risks associated with it. Like, you should definitely be going through a healthcare provider to get this. So Hims is a medical provider. You are getting a prescription through a physician, and they are working with an FDA-approved compounding facility. So they basically have their own manufacturing process and their own supply of GLP-1s. And what that means is they can offer that medication at a sort of far lower markup than medication from Novo Nordisk or Eli Lilly, for instance. Weight Watchers had a pretty firm stance against using compounding pharmacies for a long time. But in their last earnings call, they actually signaled that they might go back on that word, or they might start using compounding pharmacies. So it is a possibility. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot is when this medication is no longer on the FDA shortage list, I don't think some of these facilities can make the GLP-1s. That said, I think if they make them at weird doses, so if they're like manufacturing it at 40 milligrams rather than 50 milligrams and making the case that their patients all need that dose, they could probably keep making it. But it's a very like weird legal but kind of loophole-y situation. And I'm very curious to see how that'll change. But all to say, Weight Watchers has signaled that it's open to it.
So let's talk about Weight Watchers customers a little bit more, and more specifically their relationship with them now. Clearly, it's not going great since stock's going down, revenue's going down. But what is their pitch now to Weight Watch consumers?
They want to appeal to both weight loss medication subscribers and dieters. So to sort of succeed in this new Ozempic era, Weight Watchers thinks that it has to become a telehealth company and sell customers on like a whole range of options as a way to lose weight. But it also needs to do that without alienating its sort of traditional members. The people who've spent 40 years going to support groups still need to have access to those kinds of resources. And I think that's a really difficult sort of needle to thread. But at the same time, I don't think Weight Watchers can afford to wait, right? Like most of their consumers, and we'll talk about this in a second, actually qualify for GLP-1s. So they need to find a way to keep servicing that group.
What was the old like motto on the wall of the Weight Watchers like facilities?
It's choice, not chance. And they actually took that down because they were like, yeah, this is not true, which is pretty remarkable. Like that's a pretty sort of stark image to illustrate where they are today.
How else have they been rebranding in the past year or so?
So I'll get to the past year in a second, but it is worth talking about an earlier rebrand that came right before Sistani came on. In 2018, you remember the body positivity movement that
of course,
I think has been really good in a lot of ways, but also now when I log on Instagram, it's a lot of like really thin and hot women being like, I feel self-conscious about my thighs, but here I am in a bikini. Like, thank you so
that's
much.
not exactly the output we were looking for from this. We're just like, okay.
Like, cool, you're hot.
You don't have to. Yeah, it's great. Good for you. You're hot.
But at the height of the body positivity movement, which I would say is around 2018, Lizzo was extremely popular. Weight Watchers actually rebranded and started calling itself WW for, with a new tagline called Wellness That Works.
It's the stupidest rebrand
Yeah.
I've ever seen.
It's also so funny that they rebranded and then didn't change anything about their program. It was just the same, literally the same thing. No one fell for it. It just really flopped. And instead, I think a lot of people were like, well, yeah, the problem is I come to WW for weight loss pretty explicitly. Why else would I be a part of this?
This was also 2018, to tie it back to the beginning. 2018 was when they had 1.5 billion in profits. That was their peak of profits. So that's when they did this rebrand. They obviously saw a sea change coming. Obviously, it didn't work since they just hemorrhaged revenue.
So, when the pandemic hit, the company was shedding subscribers while companies like Noom, which you were on, gained market share because a lot of people were like, well, now that I can't meet in person, I guess I'm going to have to use my phone. And Noom is phone-based. So when Sistani took over, she wanted to turn it into a digital community. And she also, her first move was just call it Weight Watchers again. She was like, people are coming to us to lose weight. We don't need to lie to them, which brings us to our sort of current strategy around branding today. Sistani told me she had something called a one membership strategy. So what that means is that even if you're a member of Weight Watchers Clinic, you would still have kind of diet plans similar to what people on the behavioral program would have.
Right.
So everybody's on some kind of diet plans. And it's marketing traditional programs to people on medication, basically whether or not they're clinic subscribers. So they may say, hey, you're on GLP-1s. Maybe you don't get them through us, but you can still be part of Weight Watchers to watch what you're eating, make sure you get enough protein. So now basically it's saying some people on the clinic program may not be able to afford it forever.
Yeah.
The points program is always there for you. It's basically all one thing with different add-ons. I don't know whether that'll work. If you can't in one sentence be like, this is what we do, having a legacy brand is useful in a lot of ways because people know your name.
Right.
But it also means people may still have old associations with you, which is probably really tough for Weight Watchers right now.
Yeah, we talked about this in the spring. We don't actually have polling on public opinion about things, but I would imagine there's a trend line down for how people see Weight Watchers as an entity overall, which I think is the same for any diet culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Slim Fast has not aged well.
No, absolutely not. So obviously combating the public perception is a huge issue. It sounds a little bit like Weight Watchers is thinking you'll be back. You can't stay on GLP-1s forever, and this point system will be there when you come off of it. Is there a little bit of a waiting game here?
Sometimes I wonder that. I think the idea is you're going to need this nutrition program while you're on GLP-1s, but also if you have to get off GLP-1s because you can't afford it, what other options do you have?
Weight Watchers is going back to your toxic boyfriend.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah.
I'll do fine on my own. I don't need a man. Then you go back to Dennis from 30 Rock. That's what Weight Watchers is. It's Dennis from 30 Rock.
30 Rock, yeah.
So there's a lot of telehealth companies selling GLP-1s now. We talked about Hims. We talked about Ro. There's a bunch of other ones in addition to, your healthcare providers, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, selling all of those GLP-1s. How is Weight Watchers different, or are they different?
So it's a little tough. They're not super different. I think what they do have is the point system, which means that if you get off GLP-1s, you can still be a Weight Watchers member and use the traditional program, right? I think that ecosystem is a little bit unique. Maybe Noom also has it, but, Hims and Ro, I don't think have that. And one thing it has is that more than half of its members currently meet the requirements to get a GLP-1 prescription. So that's, having a BMI of 30 or above, or a lower BMI with some comorbidities like diabetes or a cardiovascular condition. And what that means is they already have this kind of existing customer base that they can market to, whereas Ro and Hims sort of had to develop new customer bases. Aside from that, though, it's kind of tough, right? I think selling existing members access to GLP-1s is fairly easy and great for them. But bringing in new customers in a marketplace where you have so many other options like Hims or Ro or whatever is really hard. What that means is that basically the brand that will spend the most on customer acquisition through Instagram spend or blanketing subways with ads or whatever will probably win, if that makes sense. But that also means each customer is really expensive. So it's kind of like a lose-lose situation on a business level.
I think unlike Row and some of these other places, Weight Watchers has been like a company benefit. Like some companies like have a whatever business subscription to Weight Watchers and offer it to all of their employees. And you talked about how Weight Watchers now has like their traditional points program, and then they have Clinic, which is all about this medical program. Do you think they might offer Clinic too through those business clients?
So it's a little tough because I think it would be great for people if businesses did sponsor this kind of thing. But it's a really expensive offering for payers, for employers who are offering this benefit to their people. And I think employers know there's going to be really high demand for it. So a lot of employers are already trying to restrict people's access to Ozempic. I think I remember reading the University of Texas healthcare system, for example, just literally changed the coverage plan. That's happening all over the country. And it's a really tough sell to go to an employee benefits manager and be like, hey, we just acquired this company, Weight Watchers, for Weight Watchers to go to employee benefits manager and say, hey, we just acquired this telehealth company. And best case scenario for that business is we maximize the amount of prescriptions we're writing because obviously the incentives are misaligned, right? Employers don't want to pay for more prescriptions. So I think it's really tough for Weight Watchers to go to an employee benefits manager and basically say, hey, we just acquired this company. We're calling it Weight Watchers Clinic now, and their business is to maximize the amount of prescriptions they write, And for an employee benefits manager, because hiring managers don't want to pay for more prescriptions. You know what I mean?
True.
Their job is to get employees benefits while paying the least amount for them.
So is there any way Weight Watchers makes their business work?
I think, the company is kind of banking on the fact that GLP-1 prices might drop as supply kind of ramps up as more is manufactured. The problem is, who knows when that's going to happen? And I'm sure that will bring a whole new set of weird side effects or things, for businesses, I mean. So it's sort of an uncertain future. I think it could happen. I guess that's what I wanted to say when it comes to Sistani, which is I really appreciate her sort of bold vision, her big steps to transform this business.
Why did they get rid of her, though? I also agree that I thought Sistani was so smart and so talented and such a good leader for the organization. Why was she let go?
This is the trouble with any public company, which is to execute a turnaround like this, you need a lot of time. You need a few years. But when you have earnings reports coming in and they're falling short of investor expectations, people get upset. So it seems like the board felt like it basically couldn't wait and give Sistani the time to see her vision through. And additionally, probably they're saying the thing we brought her in for is just not the thing we're focusing on right now, and maybe we're better served by someone else. The interim CEO, who's a new board member, actually has a bit more telehealth experience, which may have been a big selling point or just kind of a signal that that's what the board wants.
Who is that CEO?
So her name is Tara Comonte. She's the interim CEO, so I don't know how long she'll stay. She previously was the president and CFO of Shake Shack.
That's the telehealth company.
That's the telehealth company, Shake Shack. But then she worked at Tomorrow Life Sciences, which is a biotech company that helps women going through the process of getting IVF. So she has experience working with insurance and telemedicine and, I guess going on a journey with someone over a long period of time. So maybe the idea is she knows how to sort of serve her customers better. One random thing I did want to bring up is that Philip Picardi joined the company. And I don't know if you remember him.
Not really. Remind me.
So he was the editor of Teen Vogue. I think he was the digital editor of Teen Vogue.
Yeah, no, I do remember now.
And he turned, he's the sort of person who made Teen Vogue woke. Then he was the editor-in-chief of Out magazine. He's been one of our most creative people. I think he's really smart and interesting. So he was the editor-in-chief of Out magazine. He had a podcast on Crooked Media. Then he sort of moved to do less media stuff, and he was a chief strategy officer at the LA LGBT Center for a couple of years. But he actually just joined WeightWatchers as its chief impact officer. And I think I literally couldn't tell you if it's a smart hire or not. It's just an interesting hire.
So what you're telling me is that their new spokesperson is going to be Lauren Duca.
Yeah. Oh my God, that would be so funny. So he's now going to lead sort of teams across marketing, comms, and social impact. I'm really confused and curious what this is going to look like. It's kind of a crazy time.
Well, thanks for taking us through this, Yaz. We'll be back for keeping tabs, but first, a quick break followed by Associate Editor David Salazar's interview with Recording Academy CEO Harvey Mason Jr.
As clean, reliable energy demand increases at historic rates, one company is uniquely positioned to accelerate America forward. Williams. We have 116 years of know-how in powering progress, and we're ready to power the next 100 years of innovation. Learn how our natural gas infrastructure is critical to power the future of AI and electrification at williams.com.
Harvey Mason Jr. has been CEO of the Recording Academy for the past 3 years. His tenure comes amid cultural discussions about whether or not the Grammys and the Academy are still relevant. Fast Company Associate Editor David Salazar spoke with Harvey, and they chatted about diversifying the Grammy voting process and how he advocates for artists. Of course, they had to start with how artists and labels feel about AI in the music industry.
I think it's different for every person that you ask, actually, depending on their level of comfort or however tech savvy they might be. They might have had some exposure or experience with AI. Other people have just heard stories and don't know enough to really form a good opinion. But generally, my finding is that it's a really wide range between completely scared to death of AI and the other side of the spectrum is people are all in, all about it, think it's the future, know that AI is going to have a huge impact in how we create and is going to be extremely disruptive. So you might as well get on board and start adopting right now. That's, I believe, common between individual creators or labels or artists. Everybody has that range of scared to death, but very optimistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are two sort of like tracks with AI, right? There's sort of the concern around generative AI and how models are being trained. And then there's a concern around sort of name, image, likeness, using AI to impersonate people. What has been the focus of the work that the Recording Academy has done?
Really both. We've actually had some early successes and traction working along with other groups, of course, both in Tennessee, where they passed a state law, as well as in Illinois. Give some protection to artists or voice actors or people using their voice and making sure that they can control their image and their likeness and their voice, their identity, basically. And then federally, we've been really pushing hard on a couple of bills called No Fakes Act and the No AI Frauds Act coming through the House and the Senate. So both things are things that we've been working on, but also just trying to make sure that there's responsible use of AI when it comes to generative.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that's part of sort of a new rule that the Academy adopted this year for eligibility of songs created with AI. You come from the music production side of things, right? Producers are pretty big on tools like BandLab and other AI sort of beat generators that sort of help you ideate, but then maybe may not be in the final thing. How do you balance that with unlocking creativity and allowing for artistic expression using these tools responsibly?
We know technology is always going to be something that creators like me, like songwriters, producers, artists, others out in our community are going to want to use. We've all done it. Once you started using the drum machine, you started using synthesizers, computers to program on, Pro Tools, auto-tune, and the list goes on and on, all the way from AI back to the advent of stretching a skin across a log and hitting it. But they were all advancements in how we created music. So I'm really optimistic about the powers of AI and what AI can bring to the table when used as a resource. I'm more nervous about it when you start thinking about is there a world in which it replaces human creativity? You start hearing about these companies that are churning out massive numbers of songs, channels on platforms that are exclusively featuring AI generated music with very little or no human interaction or involvement. And that's a little unnerving because not only am I a creator, but the Academy represents creators. So it puts us in a unique spot. We want to advocate for our human creators. We also want to make sure they're able to use any new tool, any new technology, and have it at their disposal to create great new works of art, which we've always done. And creators are resilient. We're always going to find a way to express ourselves, to tell stories, to talk about things that are happening in our world, to express emotions, whether that's involving some AI information, inspiration. That's to be determined how far human creators are willing to go. And then, of course, there's the legislative piece. What is a copyrightable piece of creativity, piece of music? How much involvement is considered enough human involvement? Is one prompt enough? Is a prompt and an edit enough? Or does it take two edits? So these are all things that will really determine how excited we can get once we see what the guardrails are and make sure that human creativity is always protected.
Where does the Recording Academy stand on that officially in terms of like, if I'm trying to submit a song for Grammy recognition?
If you're trying to submit a song for Grammy recognition, there has to be human involvement in the category that you're submitting in. Having AI involvement does not disqualify it in any way in general. So a simple example is if I am an artist and AI wrote the song as a songwriter, as an artist, I would still be eligible for performance category, for a record of the year, but I would not be eligible for a songwriting category. So that would be like song of the year or something like that. So as long as there's a human involvement beyond a de minimis amount in your category of submission, it's eligible. So just as a general rule, you can have AI. If the AI artist was singing your song, it's not even a human artist, it's an AI voice, but a human wrote the song, you could submit it for writing categories. So that's how we like to think about it, because at no time would AI disqualify a song from being submitted across the board.
So you mentioned trying to stay ahead of the curve, trying to get ahead of AI. And I know that since last April, the Recording Academy, along with the RIAA, record labels like UMG, have all sort of been part of the human artistry campaign. And I know that, the Recording Academy played a big role in that. And that has sort of been really focused on legislation. And you've had some wins. You mentioned earlier law in Tennessee. Can you talk a bit about the Elvis Act and what that does to prevent audio deepfakes?
Absolutely. So the Elvis Act is really the first bill in the nation with a focus on making sure protecting the artist's identity and their voice and the lyrics and likeness. There was some legislation in Tennessee that was pre-existing, the right to publicity, those types of things. But this updates that, and it's really going to ensure that artists and their creative expressions can be authentic and consumers can know what it is when they're consuming it and make sure it's not being exploited, especially right now when AI can easily just blur the lines and just almost be deceptive. So this law will go a long ways to making sure that's clarified. We're really thankful to the Governor Lee in that state for making this happen, along with a lot of other people that worked really hard on it.
And so what are some of the protections there? And are they like a blueprint for federal legislation? I know you mentioned the No Fakes Act making its way through the House and Senate right now. And are there similar components of each of those?
Yes, a lot of what you're seeing in these early state bills, we hope would be incorporated into a federal new piece of legislation. That both of them have been introduced. As you know, there's so much negotiating back and forth between what stays in a bill and what doesn't. And so we're hopeful that there'll be strong bills and our desires will be represented. But ultimately, what the bills do is ensure that artists aren't going to be misrepresented by AI. You're going to have the ability to control how your voice is being used. You'll have certain approvals. You'll have certain guide rails, preventions in place, and it will be now legislated as opposed to it was wide open for everybody to interpret it the way they wanted to.
So like what I've seen on TikTok a lot are these actually, the one that gets stuck in my head the most, I don't know if you've seen it, but someone made like a deep fake Trump voice where he's singing Lana Del Rey's Summertime Sadness. If he wanted to, would he be able to sort of stop this from going through in Tennessee? Or, could he sue in Tennessee to stop that from being used?
Yes, if someone has appropriated his voice and made it say things that he didn't approve or he didn't say or he didn't have consent on, there's a lot of nuance to it. But yes, that is a general concept of what these laws hope to accomplish, is protect both consumers from being maybe confused as to if this was the actual real person, and also the original owners, I'll say, of their voice and their likeness from that being exploited against their will or in ways that they don't approve of.
What role do you see the Academy taking in ensuring equitable payment for artists across the board?
We hope to be able to advocate for all of our members, but remember, we have members in every different crafts or skill set in the industry. So we have songwriters, we have engineers, we have artists, background singers, musicians. I mean, it goes across the whole ecosystem. So we attempt to be very careful and thoughtful when we're advocating for any one specific group, because there have been times when people have asked, whether that be a label or a publishing company or a streamer or federally, a law has been attempted to be passed where you would have to reduce payment to one group to give more to another group. So that's a trap we can't fall into, and something that is a little bit dicey when you're talking about payment or royalty structures.
It's kind of a fundamental difficulty of the streaming model, right? Like, it's a finite amount of money that people are paying for their subscriptions or whatever, and that has to be divided equitably. And it's just the constant fly in the ointment of the music industry. And so a growing area is sync, is licensing for movies, and your background is in music production for movies like Pitch Perfect, Sing, Respect. What role do you think music for film and TV, whether that's doing original songs, licensing, or even sync, having your song featured in a movie or TV, what role is that going to play in the industry going forward?
It seems that it's still continuing to increase as far as an opportunity to generate new revenue. Of course, it depends on your area of focus. If you're a songwriter and just worrying about having hit records with artists, that's one focus. There's also people that are writing songs specifically for sync, and then there's music that's being recreated off of covers or iconic songs being produced for film and TV. So there's a lot of opportunity. It seems with the advent of more and more streaming platforms for film and TV that there's more content being created. You don't have to convince me that all that content needs great music. There's so much opportunity, and it's such an exciting time to be a creator.
You've been in your role since 2021. You came on at a time after Grammys had been losing a lot of viewership. There were conversations around the lack of diversity among artists being recognized. Since you've taken over, though, the Grammys have seen a huge growth in their scope by adding categories, and that can obviously help with diversity of artists being recognized. But it's also translated into a really impressive increase in viewership, right? How are you going to keep building on that momentum?
It's a very simple model, actually, because the success of our TV show drives everything we do. Starting with our voters vote on who gets a nomination and ultimately who gets a win. And if you look back who our voters are professional music people. They're musicians and engineers and songwriters. So they vote, and then those nominations are determined as the winners, and those are put on our television show on CBS in February. And for that show, we charge CBS a licensing fee. That fee comes to us as the Academy, and all the money gets used for the programs that we do, whether that's Music Cares and supporting music, or the museum and the education and preservation of music, or that's the advocacy in DC and the state and local levels. We're spending tens of millions of dollars of all these different areas to support and uplift music people. So I knew the work that we did was important. I knew all the service and support work for our community was so valuable. It was a bit under amplified, and we weren't talking about it a lot, but it was being done, and I loved that. But one of my goals was to make sure that we were able to sustain and even grow and expand the TV show, to your point. And that started with membership. As I said, with this whole flywheel model of the services serving the members, but the members are what drive the voting. We needed to make sure that we had relevant voters, relevant members, people from different genres, from different parts of the country, from different age groups, different genders, different beliefs. And that allowed us to improve the nominations and then ultimately improve who won the Grammy Awards, which then in turn improved the relevance of our show and attracted additional viewers to the show. And I'm not by any means saying any of that is perfect, because it's not. We get awards wrong. Sometimes the votes go in a way that we wouldn't expect or consumers wouldn't expect. And there's still work to be done. But my point is, starting with the membership and getting that right, which was one of the first things we did when I stepped into this role, that's how we can improve the future of the Academy and, in my opinion, the future of the industry. So we took all 12,000 voting members and requalified all of them. So if you didn't have enough credits in the current window, you could no longer continue to vote. We said, we need more, banjo players. So we go find banjo. We need more people from classical. We definitely needed more women. So we invited 2,500 new women voters in just 3 years. That goal was met last year. And we also needed more people of color. We didn't have enough diversity in that space to be evaluating some of the Black music or other genres that had typically been underserved. So I had a really supportive board and board chair. I had an incredible staff of people who wanted to do great, and they were passionate about music and serving music people.
Yeah, definitely. And it seems like you're sort of in a place where you're able to maybe even step back and say, all right, how are all the changes we've made working? Can we keep it up, and what can we do next, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's why we have to be agile. We have to be fluid. Something that makes me a little bit nervous, because there's great artists that don't win, that maybe should win. And there's great artists that are angry that they didn't win. And there's fan bases that say, this person should have won. But I take a lot of solace in the fact that the Academy is utilizing the show and celebrating these incredible artists to do more deep and impactful work around the year. So all the programs from Music Cares and the museum and the education and the advocacy and fighting for the rights of creators and protecting copyrights and making sure people get paid, all those things come from our show. So when somebody's upset and they're mad at me or they call me and send me a message, I try and take a breath and I try and understand where it's coming from, because as a creator, these are your babies. These are your songs. You work so hard on them. You perform them. You write them. And when they don't win, sometimes it can hurt. But I remember that the Academy is, of course, trying to get the awards right, always trying to get the nominations right and honor the right people. But it is subjective, and it's the will of the voters. The Academy doesn't choose any of these winners. What the Academy does is put the submissions out to the voters and let the voters vote and give the awards to the people that they vote for, and then utilize the revenue generated from that show to better our business and our industry and our community. So it's a challenging time every Grammy season, but it's also an exciting time. But we're very lucky to be able to do this work.
Okay, we are back, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we're following right now. Josh, what are you keeping tabs on?
Well, I think I mentioned this in our last episode, but instead of watching the vice presidential debate this past week, I watched the premiere of Real Housewives of New York, and I have to talk about it somewhere. For those of you who don't follow the Real Housewives of New York or haven't listened to me talk about it before, they did a complete revamp on the show, launched a brand new cast last year. I really like the cast. I think they're wonderful. I know Yaz is a watcher of the Real Housewives of New York. The cast is great. I think the combination that they have is like a real different feel from any other Real Housewives show that they have. But this season, we introduced 2 new cast members. A full cast member, Raquel Chevermont, who's an art curator. She's
wow,
pretty
her
cool.
name sounds like a fancy cheese.
It does sound like a fancy cheese. It's like a soft, over-ripened cheese.
Exactly.
But the other cast member, a friend of the show, so not a full cast member, but seems to be playing a pretty big role in the season, is Rebecca Minkoff, which is wild.
Ink's favorite person.
Ink, she's been on the pages
crazy.
of Ink quite a bit. We saw her in the Hamptons at the Camp
We
FFF.
did at Camp FFF.
She wasn't filming for Real Housewives then. And I've probably met her, and I'm sure you have met her 7, 8, a bunch of times. She's constantly around our ecosystem. It's just very weird to see her on the show, having her been on the pages of Ink and Fast Company she's been featured in. She runs Rebecca Minkoff. It's a fashion brand, if you don't know. But this is interesting to me because I think, especially with Real Housewives of New York, they seem to have made a concerted effort to feature more legitimate business people on the show. Jenna Lyons is on the series. Some of the other...
Yeah. They like recast.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Now they have some of like your traditional molds, Real Housewives, and it's kind of become a little bit of a running joke that like every single Real Housewife has their own brand, and they also release their own music. That seems to be the thing. Some of them become real businesses. Bethany Frankel has a legitimate business that she ran for a while. She's no longer on the shows, and some other people are legitimately smart business people. A lot of them are just launching like the weird wellness brands or beauty brands.
Yeah. It was Skinny Girl Cocktail Erasure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I said Bethany Frankel is a real businesswoman, also been featured on the pages of Ink. Having Rebecca Minkoff and Jenna Lyons on Real Housewives of New York, particularly Jenna Lyons, I will say, because it was kind of a big thing when she joined last season. It's just interesting, and it creates a different dynamic. I don't know. I'm loving the season. I love the crossover of Ink Fast Company names with the Real Housewives franchise, but I'll be watching the whole season long. Bring the drama, Rebecca Minkoff. Yaz, what are you keeping tabs on?
Love is Blind is back. I was drafting something yesterday, and I love having reality TV on in the background while I work. So last night I basically binged all episodes. I'm trying to come up with an excuse, but I binged all episodes of Love is Blind last night that are available. And it was kind of crazy because they follow this one totally deranged guy who keeps being like, it's so awkward that I'm rich. I hate bringing up the fact that I'm rich. Like, he can't stop saying it.
I haven't started watching yet, but I've heard the season in terms of the guys is like, oops, all villains. Like,
yeah, it's just crazy. They're all terrible. I don't know. Some of them seem nice. Everybody just seems, you know how like in previous seasons, there's at least one or two people where you're like, I would hang out with you.
Yeah.
And that is not the case for anyone on this season.
Are they still based in like North Carolina? Is that where they were?
No, it's DC this time.
Oh, it's DC this time. Interesting.
I know. It all makes sense. For the first few episodes, they followed this one weird couple in the pod with this deranged guy who kept saying he was rich and this woman who, I guess, kept pretending she was stupid.
She also said she looks like Megan Fox.
Yeah. Then they just stopped following them, and apparently producers just made that decision, and I'm really curious to see how this all works.
Yeah.
You know, apparently 7 couples got engaged, but they only decided to follow like 5 of them. So how do you make that decision as a producer, and what happened to the other couples that didn't get engaged?
That must be a crazy experience to go on that show, literally get engaged, and then not end up really on camera.
That's what I mean. I'm just like fascinated by this. If you are a Love is Blind contestant who found their soulmate, at least, you know, or found someone and then broke up, and you didn't make it on air, slide into my DMs. I'm just really curious about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it for Most Innovative Companies. Our show is produced by Avery Miles and Blake Odom with an assist from our intern, Jania Sundar. Editing by Julia Shu, mix and sound design by Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is Josh Christensen. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we'll see you next week.